The plane cut through the early morning, the monotonous drone of the engines filling the silence that passengers tried to tame. Lights were dimmed, the air conditioning blew cold, and first class felt like a sanctuary of comfort and distance. The woman entered with the confident stride of one who had long since made the world her property. She was a millionaire, an executive, an heiress, and a hunter of opportunities. She had learned early that kindness was expensive and that respect was bought with power. Before we dive into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us what city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. She wore elegance like armor, and every calculated gesture said the same. I deserve to be here. Her Italian leather shoes echoed discreetly down the aircraft aisle as she moved with the certainty that everything, the plane, the crew, the world, operated to serve her. Her slender fingers, adorned only by a platinum watch that cost more than the annual salary of any flight attendant present, held the boarding pass with the studied delicacy of the powerful. Eleanor Hayes was 42 years old and had 3 companies under her command. She had built an empire from her father's inheritance, multiplying it with the coldness of those who know that feelings don't close deals. Her divorce 5 years prior had left no visible scars. It had only made her schedule more efficient. Her son, attending college at Stanford University, communicated primarily via text messages during birthdays and major holidays. When she stopped before seat 1A, she found a man occupying the space. He didn't fit into that scenario. His calloused hands held a blanket, his disheveled hair betrayed short nights, and on his lap a boy slept soundly, his face nestled against his father's chest. The woman took a deep breath, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "This seat is mine now." The phrase came out like a verdict, natural, as if stating a universal law. The man raised his eyes, tired but serene. "Is your name on it?" he asked without aggression, just curiosity. She displayed her ticket, irritated. "First class, seat 1A. The man searched his pocket and showed another ticket with the same number. The system had duplicated the reservation. "It must be a company error," she said, impatient. "Then you can complain later," he replied. "But right now, my son is sleeping." The silence that followed seemed to extend beyond the walls of the plane. The other passengers' gazes shifted, uncomfortable, silent accomplices to the privilege. The flight attendant approached, tried to resolve it, offered the man another seat, but it was a chair in the back where the baby couldn't lie down. "He's sick," the man said without raising his voice. "I can't move him now." The woman hesitated for an instant, but pride overcame doubt. "I've been a Diamond customer for 10 years. This seat is mine." The flight attendant backed away, confused. The man adjusted his son and simply said, "Then sit down, but don't wake him." She fell silent. She sat beside him, rigid, offended. The boy breathed slowly, the soft sound mingling with the hum of the engines. For a while, the entire plane seemed to revolve around that small sound. The woman looked out the window, but the reflection forced her to see herself, and what she saw bothered her. The image of someone who had everything, but carried the emptiness of one who lives at war with their own silence. The father stroked the child's hair with the delicacy that only belongs to those who have learned that love is a tangible act, expressed in small gestures. His simple jacket was clean, but visibly worn at the elbows and cuffs. His shoes, worn on the outer sole, revealed the gait of someone who works on their feet. Everything about him contradicted the sophisticated environment of first class, but there was a natural dignity in his posture. The minutes dragged on. The woman compulsively checked her cell phone, answering messages, verifying stock quotes, refusing to allow that discomfort to interrupt her productivity. The man remained motionless, as if movement might awaken the boy. When the flight attendant offered champagne, he refused with a discreet gesture. Eleanor accepted the glass and drank it in one gulp. "How old is your son?" she asked finally, more to break the silence than from real interest. "5," the man replied. "His name is Leo." The first twist came with turbulence. A strong jolt woke the child, who began to cough. The father tried to calm him, but the boy started to cry softly, and his body trembled. "Is it a fever?" she asked without thinking. He nodded. "Bronchitis. The air conditioning doesn't help." The woman called the flight attendant, asked for water, extra blankets, and for the first time her voice didn't sound authoritative. It sounded helpful. "Warm water, please, and see if you can reduce the air conditioning in this section." She spoke with firmness, but without her usual harshness. The flight attendant, surprised by the change in tone, nodded and quickly left. Leo coughed dryly and continuously, his face red with effort. The father lifted him slightly, adjusting him against his shoulder to ease his breathing. His eyes showed the silent concern of someone who had lived that scenario countless times. "Does he take any medicine for this?" Eleanor asked, observing the child. "I have some in my pocket. I need water to give it to him." The flight attendant returned with the requested water and informed them that the temperature would be adjusted. Eleanor took the cup, tested the temperature with her finger, and handed it to the man who administered the medicine with the skill of one who performs that ritual frequently. "Thank you," he said simply. The woman merely nodded, uncomfortable with the thanks. For some reason she couldn't name. His gratitude made her uneasy, as if she were receiving something she didn't deserve. "Will he get better soon?" she asked, observing the boy's still, irregular breathing. "In a few minutes. The medicine is strong, but it works." Later, as the plane stabilized, the man explained that he was taking his son for free treatment offered by a hospital in Boston. He had sold his car to pay for the tickets and didn't know the system would put him in first class. "It must be their mistake," he said. "But for once, the mistake was in our favor." She listened in silence, surprised by the naturalness with which he spoke of his luck, a luck that in fact seemed a burden. "What kind of treatment?" she asked, breaking her own protocol of not getting involved in other people's stories. "An experimental treatment for chronic asthma and recurrent bronchitis. Leo has had it since he was 2, but last winter it got worse. The doctors back home recommended this hospital in Boston. They have a program for children from low-income families or underserved regions." "And you dropped everything to go?" The man looked at her with an expression that mixed surprise and something close to compassion. "I didn't drop anything. I'm taking everything that matters with me." The answer hung in the air between them. Eleanor looked away into the darkness beyond the window, feeling an inexplicable unease. Something in the simplicity of that statement disturbed her, like a fundamental truth she had forgotten somewhere along the way. The man noticed her discomfort and changed the subject. "Are you going to Boston for work?" "Yes," she replied, grateful for the opportunity to return to the safe territory of business. "I'm finalizing the acquisition of a winery in Napa Valley. That must be a good deal. It's a strategic investment. The European market is open for high-quality wines, and the region has centuries of tradition. Plus, the devalued euro makes the operation even more attractive." She spoke as if in a board meeting, with the precision of someone who lives in a world where feelings are irrelevant and only numbers matter. The man listened intently, nodding. "The wine from there really is very good," he said at last, with a discreet smile. "My grandfather was from a family that immigrated from that region, and he used to say that the wine from Napa carried the history of the land in every drop." Leo fell asleep again, his breathing calmer. The man adjusted the blanket around him, checking his temperature with the back of his hand on the child's forehead. "My name is Daniel," he said, breaking the protocol of formal introductions. "Daniel Miller." There was a pause. In the social logic of first class, he had committed a transgression by offering familiarity without being asked. But the child's breathing between them seemed to suspend the usual rules of the game. "Eleanor Hayes," she replied, without extending her hand but softening her tone. The surname came out automatically, as if it were necessary to establish the formal distance that separated them. The flight continued. The second twist happened when the entertainment system failed and the cabin plunged into partial darkness. The boy, scared, clutched at the woman. She froze. It had been years since anyone had touched her without calculation or interest. The warm little hand on her arm reminded her of another life before the stocks, the awards, before she had traded tenderness for power. "It's all right," she said softly, almost without realizing she was speaking. The darkness lasted only a few seconds before the emergency lights came on, creating a yellowish, strange environment. Leo, awakened by the fright, looked around with wide eyes. His breathing accelerated, a premonition of another attack. "It's okay, son," Daniel whispered, holding him closer. "It was just a power flicker. Look, it's back on." But the boy wasn't looking at his father. His eyes were fixed on Eleanor, as if seeking confirmation from her that there was really no danger. His small hand still held her arm with surprising strength. "It's no problem," she repeated, this time looking directly at the child. "Planes have extra safety systems. It's like when the lights go out at your house. But you have a flashlight." Leo continued to stare at her, evaluating the explanation. "Are you scared of the dark?" he finally asked, with the sincerity only children possess. The question caught her off guard. "Sometimes," she replied, without planning the honesty that slipped through her lips. "Me too," Leo confessed, visibly relaxing as he found an ally in her against the same fear. "But Dad says the light just hides. It doesn't really disappear. It always comes back." Daniel observed the interaction with an expression Eleanor couldn't decipher. There was something there, surprise, curiosity, perhaps even gratitude for the way she treated his son. The flight attendant passed by, distributing water and informing them that the system would be restarted in a few minutes. "Want a drawing?" Leo offered suddenly, letting go of her arm and searching for something in the small backpack next to his father. "Leo, Ms. Hayes is busy," Daniel intervened, but Eleanor raised her hand, interrupting him. "I'm curious to see this drawing," she said, surprising herself. The child took out a crumpled notebook and some colored pencils. With the solemn concentration that only children can dedicate to art, he began to draw. Meanwhile, her eyes met Daniel's, and something silent was shared, a mutual understanding that dispensed with words. "He draws all the time," the father explained. "The doctor says it's how he's found to cope with his hospital stays." "Does he get hospitalized often?" "Last winter, he had 3 hospitalizations. The longest lasted almost 2 weeks. Leo held up the drawing, displaying it proudly. It was a colorful plane flying among blue clouds and a bright yellow sun. "This is our plane," he explained, pointing to the details. "And here are the 3 of us, looking out the window." Eleanor looked at the drawing. There were indeed 3 small figures sitting by an oval window. Her chest tightened in a strange way when she realized the child had included her in that small, improvised family. "It's very beautiful," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "You have talent." Leo smiled, revealing a missing front tooth. And the contrast between that purity and the calculating world she lived in daily hit Eleanor like a physical blow. For a brief moment, She wondered when she had lost the ability to smile like that, without reservations, without agendas, just for the pure joy of being alive. The man observed that gesture and saw what no one else saw, the fatigue of one who always needs to win. During the early morning, while his son slept again, he recounted that he had been married, that he had lost his wife during a complicated birth, and since then had been trying to balance life between auto shops and hospitals. "There isn't much time left to think about the future," he confessed. "I just try to keep the present from falling apart." She didn't respond, but the way she looked at him said what words wouldn't. The night wore on, the sky outside impenetrable in its darkness. Most passengers slept, wrapped in blankets and eye masks. Leo had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his breathing more regular after the medication took effect. Daniel adjusted him in the reclining seat, covering him carefully. "How did you lose your wife?" The question came out before she could contain it, and she immediately regretted the intrusion. "Sorry, you don't have to answer." "It's no problem," he said, and his voice took on a different tone, as if speaking of something distant and close at the same time. It was during childbirth. Sarah had a heart condition that wasn't detected during pregnancy. The doctor said it was a rare complication. She saw Leo for only a few minutes. "I'm so sorry." "Me too." Daniel adjusted his wristband, a mechanical gesture that seemed to help him maintain control. "At first, I was angry. At everything, at everyone. At the doctors who didn't see the problem, at God, even at myself for not having insisted on more tests. But then Leo had his first bronchitis attack at just 6 months old, and I realized I couldn't afford the luxury of hate. I needed to be both father and mother." He pointed to the wedding band he still wore, worn by time. "Some people find it strange that I still wear this. It's been 5 years, but for Leo it's important. He looks at pictures of his mom, asks questions, wants to know what she was like. It helps keep her present for him." Eleanor observed the ring, a simple gold band that had lost its shine, but not its meaning. For an instant, she remembered her own divorce, the ease with which she had removed her own ring, like someone getting rid of a disadvantageous contract. "That's a beautiful gesture," she finally said. "It's not a gesture," he corrected gently. "It's just who we are. A different family, but still a family." "And you?" he asked after a moment. "Do you have children?" "A son? Ethan. He's in college at Stanford." She hesitated, then added, "We don't see each other much." "That must be difficult," she shrugged, as if minimizing the situation. "He has his life. I have mine. We function better that way." The words came out automatically. The speech she had repeated to herself for years, but for the first time they sounded empty, even to her own ears. "Sometimes I think," Daniel said, looking at Leo, "that we spend so much time trying to give our children what we didn't have that we forget to give them what we did have." Hours later, third twist, the ventilation system jammed. The air grew heavy, the boy started coughing again, and the desperate father called for help. The millionaire stood up and demanded onboard medical attention, threatening the flight attendant with her influence. Her action saved the child from a worse attack. When the problem stabilized, the man murmured, "Thank you." She merely shook her head. "No need to thank me." But something within her changed. For the first time in a long time, she had used her power for something beyond herself. The incident began subtly. First, it was just a change in air quality, which became denser, almost palpable. Eleanor noticed it even before Leo reacted, accustomed as she was to perceiving small alterations in tense corporate environments. The air conditioning flow had ceased completely, and heat began to accumulate in the enclosed cabin. "Something's wrong with the ventilation," she commented, looking at the diffusers on the ceiling. Before Daniel could respond, Leo awoke with a violent coughing fit. It wasn't like before. It seemed more severe, more desperate. The boy struggled to breathe, his chest rising and falling in short, quick efforts. "Leo!" Daniel sat his son upright, checking his temperature with the back of his hand. "He's burning up with a fever." The child's lips were beginning to acquire a bluish tint around the edges. His wide eyes conveyed a primal panic, the instinctive terror of not getting enough air. Daniel pressed the call button, but no one appeared immediately. "They're not coming," he said, his voice tense. "I need help." Eleanor didn't think. She simply acted. She stood up and walked quickly down the aisle until she found a flight attendant attending another call. "There's a medical emergency in seat 1A, she announced, not as a request, but as an undeniable declaration. "A child is having a severe asthma attack. The ventilation system has failed." The flight attendant hesitated. "Ma'am, we're checking the system. If you could return to your seat—" "No." The word came out like a blade. "Is there a doctor on board? First aid kit with bronchodilators? Oxygen? That child can't breathe, and every second you waste could cause irreversible brain damage." Other passengers began to observe the scene. Eleanor continued, her voice acquiring the tone she used to close multi-million-dollar deals. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am the CEO of Hayes Investments Group and a personal friend of the chairman of this airline's board. If that boy suffers any harm due to crew negligence, I guarantee the consequences will be severe and immediate." The flight attendant paled. "I'll get the emergency kit and check for doctors on board." Returning quickly to the seat, she found Daniel holding Leo, who was still struggling to breathe. Without asking permission, she took her own water bottle, moistened a silk scarf she carried in her purse, and placed it on the child's forehead. "The flight attendant is getting help," she informed him. "Hold him more upright like this." She adjusted the boy's position to maximize the opening of his airways. "Breathe with me, Leo, slowly, like this." She demonstrated a slow, deep breath, encouraging the child to imitate her. Leo tried, but each inhalation ended in a coughing fit. An elderly female doctor from another seat approached, identifying herself. "Can I help?" Daniel nodded, speechless. The doctor quickly examined Leo, checking his airways and pulse. "We need a bronchodilator immediately," she concluded. As if conjured by her words, the flight attendant returned with the emergency medical kit and a small oxygen cylinder. The doctor worked efficiently, administering the medication through an inhaler, while the flight attendant adjusted the oxygen mask. "The ventilation should be back on in moments," the flight attendant informed them, clearly intimidated by Eleanor's presence. It was a failure in the secondary system. For 20 agonizing minutes, everyone watched as Leo slowly regained the ability to breathe normally. Color returned to his face, and the panic in his eyes gradually subsided. Daniel held his hand the entire time, murmuring words of encouragement. When the crisis finally passed, Leo fell asleep, exhausted by the effort. The doctor confirmed that his vital signs were stabilizing and returned to her seat, not without first giving Daniel some recommendations for the rest of the flight. The ventilation system began working again, blowing fresh air through the cabin. The pilot made an announcement over the intercom, apologizing for the technical inconvenience and assuring that there was no risk to the flight's safety. When everyone had moved away and a relative calm returned, Daniel looked at Eleanor. "Thank you," he said simply. You saved my son." She shook her head. "No need to thank me." Her gaze fell upon Leo, asleep with the oxygen mask still on his face, which the flight attendant had left as a precaution. Anyone would do the same. "No," Daniel gently disagreed. "Not anyone. You did." Something inside her stirred, like tectonic plates adjusting after decades of immobility. The sensation was strange, almost uncomfortable, and yet surprisingly satisfying. For the first time in years, She had used her influence and power not to add zeros to her bank account, but to preserve something truly irreplaceable. "How is he now?" she asked, deflecting from the intensity in Daniel's gaze. "Better. The fever seems to have gone down." He adjusted the blanket around his son. "It was the worst attack in months. If we were in a hospital, they probably would have taken him to the ICU. Will the treatment in Boston help?" "That's what we hope. It's a new protocol combining medication with intensive respiratory physiotherapy." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his exhaustion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here." Fourth twist, the man falls asleep, exhausted. The woman watches him sleep, the boy still resting on his chest. She notices the wedding band still on his finger, worn and dull. The image hits her hard, love persisting in absence. She remembers her own divorce, the partner who betrayed her, the empire built on ashes. Suddenly, the surrounding luxury seems ridiculous. When Daniel finally succumbed to exhaustion, the digital clock in the cabin read 4:37 a.m. His head tilted to the side, and the constant tension in his shoulders relaxed for the first time since Eleanor had met him. Leo slept deeply against his chest, his breathing still a little noisy, but stable. The oxygen mask had been removed, but the flight attendant had left the cylinder nearby, should it be needed again. In the silence of the semi-darkened cabin, with most passengers asleep, Eleanor allowed herself to observe them. There was an intimacy in the scene that touched her in an unexpected way, the protective manner in which Daniel's arm embraced his son even in sleep, how their bodies adjusted to each other with the familiarity of those who share not just DNA, but a history of daily care. Her gaze lingered on Daniel's wedding band. The once shiny metal was dull, marked by time and work, but still firmly in place. 5 years after his wife's death, he continued to honor that commitment, not as an anchor to the past, but as a bridge to his son, a visible reminder that their family, though transformed by loss, remained intact in his heart. The image sparked an unexpected wave of memories. Her own marriage, undone not by death, but by mutual indifference cultivated over years. Her ex-husband David had been her business partner before they became a couple, an arrangement that seemed perfectly logical at the time. They united fortunes, ambitions, and agendas. They had a son, more as a natural consequence than a conscious desire, and when David betrayed her, not with another woman, but with a financial scheme that almost destroyed the company they built, the separation was managed with the same cold efficiency they applied to business. Eleanor removed her wedding band in a meeting with lawyers, sliding it across the table like a piece being taken off a board. There were no tears, only contractual clauses and asset division. Ethan, then 12, was sent to a boarding school at Stanford the following month to protect him from the scandal, was the official justification. The company survived. In fact, it prospered under her exclusive command. Eleanor rebuilt the empire from the ashes of betrayal, transforming it into something larger, more profitable, and more respected than it had ever been. Her reputation as a ruthless executive grew, as did her bank account. It seemed like a complete victory. So why, looking at that worn wedding band on Daniel's finger, did she feel strangely defeated? Her eyes swept across the first-class cabin, the chrome details, the soft leather of the seats, the small courtesies that cost more than many people earned in a day. All this luxury, acquired at a price she was only now beginning to calculate. Suddenly it seemed ridiculous. Leo stirred in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible before settling down again. One of his small drawings had slipped from Daniel's pocket. A colorful figure that seemed to represent 3 people holding hands under a large yellow sun. The image, in its childlike simplicity, contained a truth that all the financial reports on her laptop could not capture. Eleanor picked up her phone, navigated to the rarely accessed photo folder, and found the last image she had of Ethan. It was a formal high school graduation photo sent by the school. He smiled politely for the camera, just another young man among dozens in identical attire. She tried to remember the last time she had seen him in person. Had it been Christmas? No, she had cancelled her visit due to a crisis with Asian investors. Perhaps on his birthday? Not then either. She had sent an expensive watch with a card signed by her assistant. A disturbing thought arose. Did she know her own son better than she knew this boy she had met just a few hours ago? The night wears on. Fifth twist. The pilot announces an unscheduled stop due to weather conditions. At the makeshift airport, everyone complains. The man, out of money, tries to buy medicine at the local pharmacy, but discovers his card has been blocked. The woman observes the scene, approaches, and pays the bill without saying a word. "I don't owe you anything," he says. "I know," she replies. The metallic voice of the captain over the loudspeakers broke the cabin's quiet, waking, irritated passengers from their brief sleep. The announcement was clear. Due to severe weather conditions in Boston, the flight would make an unscheduled stop at Philadelphia International Airport. The aircraft would remain on the ground for approximately 2 hours, until the storm passed and it was safe to proceed to the final destination. A chorus of complaints spread through the cabin. Executives checked watches and smartphones, calculating delays for meetings. Tourists lamented lost reservations. The crew tried to appease spirits, promising assistance with connections and appointments after arrival in Boston. Daniel awoke with the announcement, immediately checking on Leo. The boy had also woken up, his eyes still heavy with sleep, but more alert than in previous hours. "I'm thirsty, Dad," he murmured. "Of course, son." Daniel picked up the small water bottle the flight attendant had left, but it was empty. "I'll ask for more water." "How long will we be on the ground?" he asked Eleanor as he pressed the call button. 2 hours, from what the pilot said. It might be good for Leo to breathe some air different from the cabins. The landing in Philadelphia was turbulent, with strong winds shaking the aircraft. Leo clung to his father, scared, while Eleanor instinctively gripped the armrest so tightly that her fingers turned white. In the makeshift terminal for transit passengers, lines formed for cafes and convenience stores. The air was a mix of frustration and resignation, spiced with the aroma of strong coffee and local pastries. Leo seemed better as he walked through the terminal, holding his father's hand. Color had returned to his face, and his cough had considerably decreased. Eleanor walked a few steps behind them, uncertain of her place in that dynamic that had established itself overnight. "There's a pharmacy over there," Daniel pointed. "I'm going to see if I can find his medicine. Do you want coffee or something?" The question hung between them, laden with a meaning beyond words, a tacit recognition that in some way they had become a group, united by the shared experience of the previous night. "Coffee would be great," Eleanor replied. "I'll wait here with Leo if you want." Something passed over Daniel's face. Surprise, gratitude, perhaps a hint of hesitation. Then he looked at his son, who had already sat on one of the benches, drawing again in his crumpled notebook. "Are you sure?" "Go! We'll be fine." "What are you drawing now?" she asked the boy. "The airport," he replied without looking up, "and the clouds outside that won't let us get to Boston." "They're very stubborn clouds, aren't they?" Leo laughed, a light sound that contrasted with the tense atmosphere of the terminal. "Dad says clouds aren't stubborn. They're just doing their job of giving water to the plants. Your dad is very wise." "He knows many things," the boy agreed solemnly, then softer, as if sharing a secret. "Except when he's sad. Then he forgets some things." "Does he get sad often?" Leo shrugged with that brutal honesty of children. "Sometimes, when he thinks I'm not looking, but I see him." Before Eleanor could respond, she saw Daniel returning from the pharmacy, his face visibly troubled. He sat beside them, one hand rubbing his forehead in a gesture of frustration. "What's wrong?" she asked. "They have the medicine, but—" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "My card was declined. It must be some international usage block I forgot to notify the bank about, and I didn't bring much cash." "How much does it cost?" "It doesn't matter. I'll figure it out." "Daniel!" Her tone admitted no discussion. "How much?" He mentioned a sum. It wasn't an exorbitant amount, but clearly significant for someone in his precarious financial situation. Without another word, Eleanor took her purse, stood up, and walked towards the pharmacy. She returned minutes later with a small package, which she handed to Daniel. "Here you go." He looked at the package, and then at her, an evident conflict in his eyes. Pride, necessity, gratitude, and embarrassment battled on his face. "I can't accept this. It's already done. I'll pay you back when I sort out this bank issue." "You don't have to." "I don't owe you anything," he said finally, his voice firm despite his evident embarrassment. It wasn't ingratitude, but a declaration of dignity, a refusal to be reduced to a charity case. "I know," she replied simply. Back on the plane, sixth twist. The boy wakes up feeling better. He looks at the woman and asks, "Are you rich?" She smiles, a little embarrassed. "Why?" The boy thinks and replies, "Because Dad said rich people have everything, but sometimes they forget to look out the window." She feels the gentle blow of innocence. "Your dad is wise." The boy laughs. He only says that when he's sad. The return to the aircraft brought an almost comforting familiarity. The same seat, the same crew faces, even the same scent of the climate-controlled cabin. However, something had subtly changed, as if the stop in Philadelphia had redefined the invisible rules governing that space. There was no longer the same tension, the same contested territory. When the flight attendant came to check if everything was okay, he addressed the three of them as a unit. "Can I get anything for you all?" Leo sat between his father and Eleanor this time, without anyone needing to suggest the arrangement. The air conditioning was working perfectly now, and the boy seemed considerably better after the medicine and the brief walk in the terminal. "Look, the clouds are behind us," he observed, pointing out the window as the plane gained altitude. The sky was extraordinarily clear now, a deep blue that seemed almost tangible. "They fulfilled their mission of watering the plants, like you said," Eleanor commented, surprised by the naturalness with which she adopted the child's vocabulary. Leo smiled at her, a luminous smile that conveyed the absolute trust only children can grant. Then he leaned slightly towards her, as if he were about to share a state secret. "Are you rich?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. She felt a blush rise to her face, something she hadn't experienced since adolescence. Daniel seemed equally stunned. "Leo," he intervened, "we don't ask those kinds of questions." "Why not?" the boy asked, genuinely confused. "Because." Daniel hesitated, clearly searching for an appropriate explanation for a complicated social concept. "Because it's a private matter." Eleanor regained her composure. "It's no problem," she said, and then, addressing Leo directly, "Why do you want to know?" The boy tilted his head, considering the question seriously. "Because you paid for the medicine without even thinking much, and your watch looks very expensive, and you talk like important people on TV." The raw honesty of the observation made Daniel cover his face with one hand, visibly embarrassed, but Eleanor found herself smiling. "Yes," she replied simply. "I have a lot of money, if that's what you're asking." Leo nodded, absorbing the information without judgment. "And is it good to be rich?" This time the question made her pause. It was a question no one had asked her in decades, perhaps never so directly. Was it good to be rich? The automatic answer, yes, of course it was, caught in her throat. "It's convenient," she finally replied. "It makes some things easier, but are you happy?" "Leo!" Daniel intervened again, firmer this time. "No more personal questions." "Sorry," the boy murmured, lowering his head. "Don't apologize for being curious," Eleanor said, surprising both father and son. "It's a good question. It's just not easy to answer." Leo considered this for a moment, then offered his own childlike wisdom. "Dad says rich people have everything, but sometimes they forget to look out the window." The phrase hit Eleanor with unexpected force. It was simple, almost banal, and yet it contained a truth that resonated within her like a bell. She looked at Daniel, who seemed uncomfortable with his son's indiscretion. "Your dad is wise," she said, genuinely impressed by the depth of the observation. Leo laughed, a sound clear and light like bubbles rising in water. "He only says that when he's sad." The innocent confession hung in the air between them. Daniel looked away, fixing his gaze on the seat back in front, as if there he could find refuge from the truth inadvertently exposed by his son. The vulnerability of that moment was almost palpable. "Sometimes," Eleanor said, breaking the uncomfortable silence, "all of us forget to look out the window. Rich, poor, everyone." Seventh twist. The man receives a message. His job has been cut. He hides it, but she notices. "Do you want to pretend everything is fine?" she asks. "I can't lose focus. The doctor said his treatment depends on his calm," he replies. Her control begins to waver. There is strength in that humility she never knew. Daniel's phone vibrated discreetly. He took it out of his pocket, checked the screen, and his face instantly changed. It was almost imperceptible. A brief tightening of the jaw, a longer blink than normal, a controlled sigh. But Eleanor, trained for decades to read micro-expressions in negotiation meetings, caught every sign. He quickly replied to the message and returned the device to his pocket, resuming a neutral expression with efficiency. But his hands, those working hands that betrayed his history, tightened slightly on his knees, revealing the tension he tried to hide. "Bad news?" she asked, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Leo. Daniel hesitated, clearly debating whether to share or keep the matter private. "Nothing important," he finally replied. "Do you want to pretend everything's fine?" she asked directly. He looked at her, surprised by her frankness. A small, humorless smile curved his lips. "Does it work?" "Rarely," she admitted, "but we all try." Daniel looked at his sleeping son, then at his own hands. When he spoke, it was so softly that she had to lean in to hear. "The company in Boston, the job interview." He paused. "They cancelled. Internal restructuring. They're not hiring anymore." "I'm sorry." He shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize the impact of the news. "There are other possibilities, but this one was important. It was the most promising," he admitted. "Good position, decent salary, extensive family health plan, perfect for our situation." Eleanor recognized the magnitude of the blow. It wasn't just a lost professional opportunity. It was a lifeline, a solution to the most immediate problems they faced. Surely, but few willing to hire a foreigner with a sick child needing days off to accompany treatment. He ran his hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Sorry, I don't want to sound negative." "You don't sound negative, you sound realistic." Daniel looked at Leo, who slept peacefully, oblivious to the new obstacle in their path. "The important thing now is the treatment. I'll find something, even if it's temporary." His voice regained its firmness. "I can't lose focus. The doctor said his treatment depends on his calm. Children sense their parents' anxiety. I have to maintain stability." Eleanor watched him, truly impressed. It wasn't the first time she had seen someone facing adversity, of course. In her position, she often had to lay people off, cut entire departments, end projects in which teams had placed hopes. But this quiet determination, this refusal to allow circumstances to dictate his attitude, was something different. It wasn't resignation, nor naive optimism. It was a form of courage she rarely found in the high corporate echelons where she moved. "Have you always been like this?" she asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Like what?" "So centered, even when things fall apart." Daniel considered the question, giving her the respect of an honest answer instead of false modesty. "No, before Leo was born and Sarah died, I was different, more impulsive, less patient." He paused, remembering. "When I lost Sarah, I thought I wouldn't survive, literally. There were days I saw no point in getting out of bed." "What changed?" "Leo cried," he replied simply. "A 3-day-old baby, without a mother. And all I had to offer was my grief. It wasn't fair to him." He looked at his son with an expression that contained so much love that Eleanor felt almost an intruder witnessing it. "I learned it's not about being strong. It's about being necessary." Something within her began to yield, like a structure long frozen, finally reacting to heat. There was a strength in that humility she had never known, never sought, in fact. Her life had been built on the premise that power was conquest, control, absolute independence. The vulnerability of depending on someone, of being necessary, of putting another's well-being above one's own comfort, those were weaknesses to be avoided at all costs. Or perhaps they weren't. The plane approaches its destination. The flight attendant returns, tries to reassign them again. The woman refuses. "Leave him where he is." Everyone finds it strange. She just says, "It's the right seat." The landing in Boston was surprisingly smooth, as if the pilot wanted to compensate for the turbulence during the rest of the journey. The aircraft glided elegantly down the runway, gradually slowing until it parked at the designated gate. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the chief flight attendant's voice over the intercom, "welcome to Boston Logan International Airport. The outside temperature is 65 degrees Fahrenheit, with partly cloudy skies. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the fasten seatbelt sign is turned off." The passengers, anxious after the long and turbulent journey, began to stir. Phones were switched on, messages sent, plans reorganized. The impatience was palpable, as it always is in those liminal moments between flight and return to solid ground. Leo looked out the window, enchanted by the service vehicles surrounding the plane, the flashing lights, people in safety vests gesturing with wands. "Look, Dad, it's like little ants working." Daniel smiled, sharing his son's enthusiasm. "Yes, everyone has their job. See that one with the luggage, and that one bringing fuel for the next flight?" Eleanor observed the interaction, aware that in a few minutes their lives would take separate paths. There were meetings waiting for her, the winery to inspect, contracts to sign, and Daniel had a sick son, a treatment to begin, and now an uncertain future in a foreign city. The idea of them saying goodbye and each going their own way caused her surprising discomfort. The chief flight attendant approached their seats, leaning in discreetly. "Ms. Hayes, on behalf of the airline, we would like to apologize again for the inconvenience with the duplicate reservation. As compensation, we offer accommodations for Mr. Miller and his son in the arrivals area while we arrange alternatives." Eleanor looked at him, confused for a moment. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes, for your husband and son," the flight attendant replied, misinterpreting the situation. "We can transfer them to the next flight in business class if they prefer to return today." Daniel, who had heard the conversation, intervened quickly. "There's a misunderstanding. We're not—" "Leave him where he is," Eleanor interrupted him, addressing the flight attendant with firmness, but without her previous arrogance. "There's no need for a transfer." The flight attendant hesitated, clearly confused. "But, Ma'am, I thought you were dissatisfied with sharing the seat." "Circumstances have changed," she replied simply. As you wish. He gave a slight bow and moved away, still visibly intrigued. Daniel looked at her, an unasked question in his eyes. It's the right seat, she said, offering no further explanation. The landing is smooth, but the moment of disembarkation is the 8th twist. The man, with his son in his arms, tries to say goodbye discreetly. She stops him, hands him an envelope. It's not money, she warns. Inside, a letter of recommendation and a contact. Maintenance Engineering, Boston branch. He stares at her in silence, unsure what to say. It's just a chance, nothing more. Wait, Eleanor said, interrupting Daniel's goodbye. There was something in his formality, in the way he tried to minimize the bond that had formed during those hours, that deeply bothered her. She opened her briefcase note, which contained a series of documents meticulously organized in dividers. From one of them, she took out an envelope and a business card. Before you leave. She extended the envelope to Daniel. I want you to have this. He looked at the envelope with suspicion, clearly uncomfortable. What is it? It's not money, she clarified quickly, noticing his concern. It's something different. Daniel accepted the envelope hesitantly, still without opening it. You can open it, she encouraged. With Leo watching curiously, Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a letter with the elegant letterhead of Hayes Investments Group written on high-quality paper. His eyes quickly scanned the contents, widening in surprise as he read. This is a letter of recommendation, Eleanor confirmed, and more importantly, a contact. She pointed to a name highlighted at the end of the letter. Maintenance Engineering, Boston branch, Hayes Industrial Climate Solutions. My company has a division here that works exactly with the systems you mentioned, refrigeration and ventilation equipment for large-scale facilities. Daniel looked at the letter, then at her, clearly stunned by the unexpected turn of events. I don't understand. Your company has operations in Boston. We have operations in several countries and across the U.S. The Boston division was established 3 years ago when we acquired a local company. They're in an expansion phase. She also handed him the business card. James Sullivan, Director of Operations. He's already expecting your call. I mentioned your qualifications and experience. Leo watched the scene without fully understanding what was happening, but he caught the emotion on his father's face. Daniel remained silent, holding the letter as if it was something fragile that could disintegrate at any moment. Why? He finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. Eleanor could have given several answers. She could have mentioned the need for technical talent in the company. She could have framed the situation as a mutually beneficial business opportunity. But for the first time in a long time, she opted for the simple truth. Because you deserve a fair chance, and because Leo deserves to have his father nearby during treatment, without additional worries. Daniel stared at her in silence, unsure what to say. The gratitude in his eyes was evident, but there was also something more, a kind of recognition, as if he were seeing her completely for the first time. It's not a job guarantee, she clarified. It's just an introduction. You'll still need to go through interviews, demonstrate your skills, but it's an open door, not a closed one. I don't know how. No need to thank me, she interrupted gently. It's just a chance, nothing more. Leo, realizing that something important had happened, tugged on his father's sleeve. What is it, Dad? Is it a good thing? Daniel swallowed hard, visibly emotional. Yes, Leo, it's a very good thing. He knelt down to his son's height. Ms. Hayes is helping us find Dad a job here in Boston while you get your treatment. The boy's eyes lit up. Then we can go see the historic fort and the dragons. Yes, we can, Daniel confirmed, laughing through the emotion that threatened to overflow. When he stood up again, there was a renewed determination in his gaze. I won't waste this opportunity, he promised. I'll prove your vote of confidence was deserved. I'm sure you will, Eleanor replied. Then, surprising herself, she added, "And perhaps when you visit the historic fort, I can join you to see the dragons too." Ninth twist. Weeks later, she receives a message, a photo of the boy smiling in the hospital, no longer with a fever. At the bottom, a phrase, "He asked if you still look out the window." She smiles to herself, her heart light for the first time in years. 3 weeks had passed since the flight to Boston. Eleanor had returned to New York City after concluding the winery acquisition, a deal that, according to all analysts, represented one of the most strategic and lucrative investments of the year for Hayes Investments Group. The company's shares had risen almost 3% when the agreement was publicly announced. It was a typical Wednesday in her office on the 20th floor of a glass-clad tower in New York City. The panoramic view of the city stretched as far as the pollution allowed the eye to see. A grey carpet of concrete and steel, dotted by a few rare green patches of parks and plazas. Eleanor reviewed reports, signed documents, conducted video conferences with subsidiaries on 3 continents. The usual routine, executed with the mechanical precision that had taken her to the top. But something was different, something subtle, almost imperceptible to any external observer, but deeply present for her. Occasionally, her gaze drifted to the window. Not to admire the financial empire she had helped build, not to contemplate the status that view represented, but to observe the sky, searching, almost unconsciously, for shapes in the passing clouds. Her assistant Ashley entered after knocking discreetly on the door. "Excuse me for interrupting, Miss Hayes. An email arrived that you asked to be notified about immediately." "From Boston?" "Yes, from Mr. Daniel Miller." Eleanor nodded, trying to maintain a neutral, professional expression. "Thank you. Ashley, you may go." When she was alone again, she allowed herself a moment of hesitation, a small vulnerability she would never demonstrate to others. She took a deep breath before opening the email. The message was simple, without flourishes. Daniel had never been a man of many words. There was a brief account of the beginning of Leo's treatment, about how the doctors were optimistic about the initial response to therapy. He also mentioned that the interview at Hayes Industrial Climate Solutions had gone well. Director Jim Sullivan had been impressed with his experience and had hired him immediately. He had already been working for 2 weeks, adapting to the new team and responsibilities. But what really captured her attention was the attachment. A photograph of Leo in the hospital, not lying in a bed with machines, as she initially feared, but sitting in a colorful activity room. He smiled broadly, showing the gap where a tooth had been. Now a new tooth was beginning to emerge. He held a drawing he had made, a historic fort on a hill with 3 small figures on top. At the bottom of the image, handwritten in messy, childlike script, was a message. "He asked if you still look out the window." Eleanor felt something strange happen. A warm, liquid sensation pressing behind her eyes, a tightness in her throat. She recognized with surprise they were tears. How long had it been since she had cried? Years, certainly. But these were different tears. Not of frustration or anger, nor even of sadness. They were tears of a kind she had forgotten existed, of relief, of connection, of something close to happiness. She allowed herself to smile, a genuine smile without an audience, without a strategic purpose, just the natural expression of a heart that for the first time in years felt lighter. The 10th and final twist arrives months later, on another flight. Same route, same aircraft. A flight attendant asks her if she wants seat 1A. She refuses. "No, I prefer the aisle." When the plane takes off, she sees a man and a child boarding. She recognizes the smile, the calm gaze. He waves, she waves back. No words, just the certainty that some journeys don't end with landing. 5 months later, another airport, another early morning. The same Boston-New York route, the same airline. Eleanor waited in the executive lounge, a cup of untouched tea in front of her. She hadn't slept well the night before, but from a strange anxiety she couldn't name. This trip to Boston had been different from previous ones. In addition to the usual business meetings, she had found time for other things. She visited Faneuil Hall on a sunny afternoon, accompanied by a very special 5-year-old guide who insisted on showing her every tower, every cannon, every piece of history, with the contagious enthusiasm of childhood. Daniel had accompanied them, more relaxed than she had ever seen him, with a new air of stability and confidence. Leo's treatment was progressing better than the doctors had initially predicted. There were still challenges, still difficult days, but the improvement was undeniable. And Daniel had settled well into the company, his technical competence quickly recognized and valued. They had met regularly during her visits to Boston in recent months, always with Leo at first. Outings to the zoo, the aquarium, to parks where they could look for dragons in the clouds. Then, occasionally, Daniel and she alone for dinner when Leo was with the babysitter who now helped them a few nights a week. The loudspeaker announced the boarding of the flight to New York. Eleanor collected her carry-on bag and headed to the gate. First class was called first, as always. The flight attendant smiled as he checked her ticket. "Good evening, Ms. Hayes. Your usual seat, 1A, is prepared." She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I prefer the aisle, if possible." The flight attendant seemed surprised, but quickly reorganized the allocation. "Certainly, seat 3C is available. May I ask the reason for the change?" "I prefer the aisle view this time," she replied, with a small smile that the man would not understand. On board, she settled into her new seat. There was something symbolic in this choice that she couldn't fully articulate, even to herself. A break in pattern, a silent affirmation that things had changed, that she had changed. Boarding continued. Eleanor discreetly checked each passenger who entered, although she told herself she wasn't waiting for anyone in particular. She had spoken with Daniel the day before. He and Leo had no plans to travel to New York anytime soon. The plane was almost completely boarded when she saw them, a man and a child, entering through the aircraft door. Daniel's hair was shorter than the last time they had met. Leo wore a new blue jacket and held his father's hand with a quiet confidence that contrasted with the fragility he had shown on the first flight they shared. They didn't notice her immediately, busy finding their seats. They were in economy class, as far as she could tell. Eleanor's heart raced in a way she hadn't experienced since adolescence. What were they doing here? Why hadn't they mentioned this trip? When Leo finally looked in her direction, his face lit up with a smile so genuine, so free of calculation or artifice, that something within her painfully expanded. "Ms. Hayes!" he exclaimed, loud enough for several passengers to turn. Daniel looked in the direction indicated by his son, and his eyes met hers. There was genuine surprise there, so it wasn't a planned coincidence. A slow smile formed on his lips, followed by a discreet wave. She returned the gesture, aware of the butterflies in her stomach, the sudden lightness in her chest. They didn't exchange words. They didn't need to. There was a silent understanding between them, a communication that transcended physical distance and social conventions. As the plane taxied down the runway, preparing to take to the skies, Eleanor looked out the window. The night was clear, the stars visible above the city lights. She thought of the first time she had met them, of the improbable circumstances that had brought them together. She thought of the twists that casual encounter had provoked in her life, of how a dispute over a seat had transformed into something entirely different. There was a truth she only now fully understood. Some journeys don't end with landing. They continue far beyond airport runways, transcending air routes and destinations marked on tickets. Some journeys happen within us, redrawing internal maps, recalibrating emotional compasses. The plane accelerated, and the thrust of the engines pressed her against the seat. Then came those magical moments of aviation, when weight and gravity seem momentarily overcome, when the impossible becomes possible, and tons of metal and people simply fly. Outside, the sky opens. Inside her too. And the woman who once said, "This seat is mine now," discovers that some places and some people are not conquered. They are given, by accident or destiny, only to those who still know how to sit with an open heart. If this story touched your heart, like, comment and subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be remembered.